There's a distance between us.
My presentation is Together We Thrive, Empowerment and Inclusion in the Queer Community. Before I begin, I just want to talk really quickly a little bit about NJ4S. If you guys don't know, we are a new initiative granted to us, and we aim to support entire families addressing both academic achievement and other achievements such as, one second, sorry, emotional well-being of individual students. And we do all this through evidence-based prevention. It's early intervention and collaborative efforts with the community. We ensure every child receives the comprehensive support they need to flourish. We also act on a tier 3 system. If you want to know more about those systems, please feel free to email us, contact us in any way that you can. Now, without further ado, I'm going to get started. Feel free to interject, ask questions, put in the chat. This is not one of those presentations where I'm just going to be speaking to y'all because, it's kind of boring. I, for one, don't like those. I want to open the floor to you guys and really ask you guys questions. And I want to, talk to you guys and understand what you guys think these topics mean and really, see how others think. Now, before we begin, I really want to ask you guys, what does inclusion and empowerment mean to you? Now, this doesn't have to be, regarding, the LGBTQ plus community. It could be all, any other type of community that you want to highlight. So please feel free to drop it in the chat or unmute yourself. See the message coming in. Feeling of being accepted, making sure everyone feels welcomed, equity for all communities and populations. Yeah, these are a lot of very good ideas. Freedom to be part of society as your authentic self without judgment, feeling safe. Yes, that is a very big one. Thank you, Rachel. I love that that was mentioned. Supported. I see many amazing points and many amazing, contributions to the conversation, and I thank you guys for that. Personally, for me, this is what inclusion and empowerment means to me. Women's rights, ageism not being a thing, racism not being a thing, and equality for all, despite what you identify as, So it's very, much inclusive to everybody. And I feel like we are going to hear a lot of that word inclusivity, empowerment, uplifting everyone's communities. And I just want to make that clear that this presentation is not just for the queer community, but it's for everyone alike. No matter what you identify, no matter what you feel like, okay, this is where I belong. Society tends to put people in boxes because it's comfortable and it's easier to identify. But this presentation wants to kind of not destroy those boxes, but kind of thin the walls a bit more and kind of get us to really talk to each other and really understand why we think that way. Because there's nothing wrong with thinking a certain type of way, but it is wrong if you're closing your mind to others' opinions and others' opportunities, because that's how we kind of, have these sort of, things that separate us, like racism, inequality, ageism. All right, now without further ado, let's begin. So inclusion is defined as the active practice of including and accommodating those who have historically been excluded, versus empowerment is the state of being empowered to do something. Now, for me personally, when it comes to inclusion, we've heard many expressions about what it is to be included, but for me, inclusion is making sure we give everybody a seat at the table, as it's said, and making sure everybody kind of understands where everybody is coming from. And empowerment goes hand in hand with that when we uplift each other's communities and we really push all of our agendas. Now, in society, we tend to kind of put each other against each other because we want to get our points across, and sometimes it gets lost in the translation of it. All right, now my next question, well, it's not really a question, it's more of a statement. This next section kind of encompasses how intersectionality goes hand in hand with inclusion and empowerment. Now, it's very important to understand that when we see intersectionality, we acknowledge how different communities have this sort of circle and they overlap, these like linkage of circles, and it's very important that we make that. Now, Intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, gender, as they apply to given individual or group, regarded as recreating or overlapping or interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Now, this is what I was talking about in the sense of like we tend to focus on who has it worse. There are these levels. So it's important to make apparent that ideas do exist, but at the same time, we want to recognize if we can break away from it and destroy the stigma and the separation, it'll be better for all. Now, intersectionality could be seen, for example, someone who is transgender and they're also a woman and they also are Black. And it's, they have many different linkages that lead them to this intersectionality. They're all part of many different groups that they identify with versus somebody who is, a gay man, but they are just white. They're only a part of this one, maybe two circles, depending on. Now, it all very much changes through time, and it's very evident and very seen in most of the things we do. All right. So this next is going to focus on the importance of inclusion and empowerment. So it's very important that if we promote these ideas of accepting and belonging, that it'll increase tolerance, that it's going to increase these ideas of it's okay to be this way, it's okay to have these certain ideas. But it's also very important to understand that when these ideas are challenged, it could leave somebody feeling a sense of, are my ideas not as important as this person? And like I said before, this is not the purpose of this presentation. The purpose of this presentation is really to get us all to really see each other for who we are. All right. Now, these are just some benefits of inclusion and empowerment. So according to TBD.com, better leadership is very one. By having empowering leadership, one of the main objectives of inclusive and empowering leadership is to make people feel safer at work. Our work environments is a place that we all spend a lot of time in. I can assure that, we're here at PL, we're here in the home office, and we're very much here for a fat amount of time in the day, and we're spending it with the same amount of people. It's new, but by being more comfortable to be their authentic selves and more valued, this leads to professional growth, employees having access to more creativity and being more engaged. So this is kind of telling, leadership, like people in power, that by being more inclusive and by having, that empowerment of like, what, I see you and I'm looking you directly in the eye, it's kind of giving somebody that leg up and it's letting them know, what, this is for real, something that you can benefit from and I can benefit from as the leader. Now, better education environments. Now, I got this from Drexel University, which is, a university in Pennsylvania, for those who don't know. Inclusion in the classroom is critically important because it fosters each child's sense of belonging, feeling of being seen and understood for who they are, and their inherent value as a human being. Now, I feel like most of us get this when we get to that college level, when we get into these classrooms of like, the teachers challenging of what we've been taught, challenging of what we've known. And, most people, they either welcome it or they kind of, falter and they say, this is not for me. But if we kind of put these more into, say, middle school or high school, and we kind of let these kids know that it's okay to be who you are, but it's also okay to not be ignorant. And I feel like that word is something that you're going to hear a lot from me today, because when you are ignorant, it's kind of like saying you don't care. Now, it's very important to see that ignorance and break it. And my last point is acceptance and diversity. We are all a very diverse group. Like I look at everybody who I work with and I look at everybody that I talk to and I see different shades, different colors, I see different flags, and that makes me feel so like, wow, this is so empowering because I see so many different people and we're all working together for the same thing, for mental health, to better mental health, to better education. And personally, when you have acceptance and diversity and you understand everybody's background and you have more knowledge, it'll break down that ignorance that I was talking about and it'll kind of bridge that gap. Now, how can we foster sustainable environments of inclusion and diversity? Now I want to open the floor to y'all and I want to hear what you guys have to say. Now I'm gonna be quiet and I'm gonna let y'all talk.
I guess not being so closed-minded, even if like we don't know or like not too aware of other people's backgrounds, like feeling free to ask questions or even just being, admitting that you don't know.
Right. That is so good. Thank you, Jen, for that. I feel like a lot of the time when we're sharing parts of ourselves, like I could tell you for sure in the office, like when I'm hearing Rashana talk about how passionate she is about, the different types of things that she's been through, like her family, for example. When I hear Safa talk about her husband, or when I hear anybody talk about, something that they love, I try always to actively listen because that's a sign of respect. But it's also kind of like taking what I know from them and kind of like not being afraid to answer a question, like Jennifer said. Like, and I feel like a lot of us struggle to, ask those questions because we feel like it might make somebody feel uncomfortable or not comfortable. But it's very important that we, understand that yes, it may be uncomfortable, but it's also important to kind of like word it correctly. Kind of like what Rachel said in the chat. Thank you, Rachel, for saying that. I saw it. And personally, fostering sustainable environments, I've heard and I've also read through my research that it's very difficult for a lot of people. And I was like, how could it be so difficult for people when I just said it, we're people, we're all kind of similar. And it's because these ideas of, classism, ageism, they all come into play, people have different ideas. I see somebody else has something in the chat. Julia said yes, and knowing what questions are appropriate and not. For real, that is very true. I feel like a lot of people, they struggle with social cues. Everybody has a different idea of what common sense is. We don't have that same idea. Being open to having difficult conversations. Education. Yes, Shakara, thank you. That is a big whole point of this webinar is for real education. The more you know, the better you are at asking questions, answering questions, and spreading that knowledge. So thank you for that. Okay, so now we are going to move forward. These are some other ways that you can create, that you can, foster these environments, by creating a welcoming environment. Hey, listen, we've all heard, some people say, I promise this is a safe space. And then we roll our eyes afterwards because we know it's not really a safe space, no matter how much they are trying to make it a safe space. It doesn't come off that way sometimes. The way we can create a welcoming environment is by making sure we are pillars of that foundation. So by holding up that, by saying, you know what, it's welcoming, I got you, what do you have to say? I'm not going to judge you, I'm going to listen to you. By opening yourself up to people that you are not familiar with, and you're not familiar with their lifestyle, you're not familiar with what they like to do, and being open, that's kind of creating this environment of like, hey, this person is listening to me. They may not know exactly where I come from, they may not know exactly what I'm talking about, but they're at least listening to me and they're trying to understand. That's the most thing that we can all do is try to understand. I feel like a lot of us feel like we can't give people what they want. So we just kind of say, I don't know what to tell you. And it's true, sometimes that is what you have to say. But be honest and say, I don't know what to tell you. What I would tell you is this, this, and this. Those are some other examples. Promoting an open dialogue. That leads into my next point. Open dialogue is foundation of an inclusive workplace, establishing channels and platforms where employees feel safe and encouraged to express their thoughts, opinions, and ideas. And this doesn't just have to be for work, it can be for friendships. I feel like relationships, you have to make the person feel safe to voice their opinion. And then, of course, celebrate diversity. I feel like I said, diversity is a part of everyday life. You're going to see people that don't look like you. You're going to see people that don't think like you. So, celebrating diversity involves going beyond a superficial acknowledgement of differences and actively recognizing and appreciating the unique backgrounds, cultures, and perspectives that each person brings to the table. Now, culture is something that plays into everyday life. We all come from different cultures. I come from two different cultures. Hey, three, I'm American as well. And I feel like something that comes into play is, the shift from cultural competency to cultural humility. To its core, it remains the same. It's to understand that there is a cultural difference, but also to see that we are all the same. And I feel like once we get that idea of cultural humility, we are able to come to terms with everybody's differences. All right. So now we come to a portion where I find very impactful because you'd believe it or not many people know their queer history, and it's a part of history. I feel like a lot of us know like the basics. So this next part, I'm just going to talk to you guys a bit about very important moments in queer history and some that you may know about, some that you may not know about. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to, drop it in the chat. Anything you want to say, drop it in the chat or interrupt me. Hey, I don't mind interruptions. All right. So this is just a little timeline. So in 1924, we had the Society for Human Rights. So let me tell you a story. After being temporarily committed to a mental institution because of his sexual orientation, Henry Gerber, a German immigrant and a World War I Army enlistee, establishes the Society for Human Rights. This was the first American homosexual rights organization that allowed gay people alike to congregate. Now, if you guys look on the screen to the bottom right corner where the cars are and the trees are, that is where they congregated. It was like a house form because this is where they weren't allowing people to really congregate in public places. And then we move forward to 1955, a little bit later, the Daughters of Billets. Now, these were the first lesbian rights organization founded in San Francisco by Dorothy Louise Teleferro, Del Martin, and Phyllis Lyon. Now, this organization was created for lesbians to congregate safely. And the picture above the Society for Human Rights with all those women surrounded by that table, that's the first organization of the Daughters of Billets, which I thought was very, very special to see. And fun fact, Martin and Lyon were the first same-sex women to get married in the country. Now we have the first gay uprising in 1959. Now, when we hear gay uprising, we think of the Stonewall riots, which we'll get into in a little. But what the first gay uprising was is that one night in May of 1959, police attempted to arrest 3 people for legally congregating. So what happened was a large group of transgendered women and others pelted officers with donuts and coffee and paper plates until they were forced to retreat, and then they later returned with larger numbers. When the police returned, a riot ensued, and it lasted for a whole day, and they had to shut down the main street. So this was the first time where we for real saw like people standing up for their rights as, gay individuals, queer individuals. And if we look at the top left corner of the screen, that's where they were congregating. It was the Duna Palace, and the police didn't really like that very much. So then when we move forward, we move towards the Stonewall riots. I feel like most people understand the Stonewall riots, or they heard of the Stonewall riots. So in the early morning hours of Saturday, June 28th, 1969, 9 policemen entered the Stonewall Inn. And this was a gay bar on Christopher Street in Greenwich Village. And they started to take several different of the patrons into custody. And the reason they were doing this is because in New York at the time, there was a law authorizing arrest of anyone not wearing gender appropriate clothing. Now, gender appropriate clothing was more so, pants for men and dresses for women. When you walked into this bar at the time, you can see women in pants, and then there were some men who were cross-dressing into women's clothing. Now, what ended up happening was a riot started because of this. I feel like a lot of people, if they do know or they don't know, Marsha P. Johnson, she was credited to throw the first stone at Stonewall. And then this began a 5-day long riot of, people coming after the police, people defending, people in the community because they felt like they've had enough of hiding in different places. They wanted to be public. And then a year later, we have the first Gay Pride Week, which of course we now know as Pride Month. A year after the rebellion at the Stonewall Inn, LGBTQ people from across New York City gathered to commemorate the first anniversary of the gay liberation movement. The Christopher Street Liberation Day Committee named the day leading up to the March Gay Pride Week. When individual organizations could host their own events and activities, this is what they would do. Now, this is very important because Pride in New York is June 30th, and it begins, I believe, on 7th Avenue, and it goes all the way down to Christopher Street, where the Stonewall Inn is still standing and it's still operating. And this is very important because it's known as, the start of pride, the start of people being open, and the start of people really being seen. And it's very important, of course, in queer history. Of course, this wasn't the last of it, but this was definitely like where we start seeing like the trickle effects of, people standing up for their rights. And of course, later we see, gay marriage being approved and many other, different events in queer history. All right. So now I want to ask you guys a question. Why do we talk about inclusion and empowerment specifically in the queer community? I feel like when we hear about, oh, we have to be more inclusive, we have to be more empowered, I feel like I hear a lot of that when I hear, oh, the LGBTQ community. Why? Why is that? Why do you guys think?
I think I think it's important to still be talking about it because can you hear me? Getting a note.
Yes.
Okay. I think it's a misconception that it's not something we need to worry about anymore. It's 2024, everyone's included, but that's just not true. We just happen to live in a very, safer area that is very inclusive. We live in a blue state right by New York City. So to us, it might not seem like this is a problem anymore, but we really still need to keep that empowerment for the queer people that live in other places in the country, especially with all the legislation that's happening right now. Um, it's very, very unsafe for those people in other places of the country, and they matter just as much as we do up here.
But yeah, thank you so much, Julia, for that. Like I 100% agree with you. Like it's not just because we're in a, very liberal state that's very open to different people, being who they are, that we can't forget about the others. Rachel says because being a part of the community can mean and look different to everybody. That is very true. There is a lot of parts of the community that we don't really talk about. Like we talk about definitely, the LGBTQ of it all, but we don't talk about, the asexuality. We don't talk about, the other different gender identities that there are. And I feel like being inclusive and being empowered is kind of making sure you are seen. And it's very important to others that, they are seen. Is there anybody else that wants to drop anything in the chat or come forward or say anything? Oh, I see something. When queer people were excluded for so long, we need to make sure we continue to maintain inclusion in personal and professional spaces. That is so true. And I feel like a lot of the newer generation, Gen Z, if you will, they're kind of breaking these norms and they're kind of saying, well, why do I need to come out? Like, that's a big thing. Like, coming out is not really a thing anymore. Some people feel like because it's so, inclusive that they could just be who they are, which is great. But a lot of, the older people, I guess the boomers, if you will, they genuinely feel like this is a very important part of coming out and really reclaiming who you are because you couldn't do so for so long. And I feel like that's a conversation that we really don't hear too much about. Oh, Ben said for the same reason we still talk about the rights of others or various sections of the intersection of humanity, people are still being discriminated and legislated against despite our perception of progress. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Ben, for that. Later in the presentation, we're going to talk about some things that are still going on, that are still very much, affecting the queer community and very much are affecting everybody in this country. It's not just a queer issue, it's an everybody issue. And I feel like we need to help others understand that. All right, okay, we are going to move forward. So how do we break current stigma? To break current stigma, we must have some serious structural changes. I don't know about you guys, but the way things are done in this country, the way, not to get political, the way some things have been passed, it's just kind of like very against certain communities. We've seen the overture of Roe versus Wade. We've seen, they're coming after the queer community with gay marriage, trying to reverse that. We have a lot of things coming. So stigma interventions. So I got all this from Noreen 2018, which is a very popular paper that talks about stigma intervention in the queer community. Stigma interventions include legal and policy changes, as well as education and social norms. Campaigns to reduce social stigma, legal and policy changes can target repealing stigmatization, civil, and religious laws, including those reviewed within this chapter, as well as enacting protections for LGBTQ people. These legal and policy changes are slowly happening throughout the world. For example, the Supreme Court of India struck down Section 377, a remnant of the British Penal Code that criminalized same-sex sexual practices in 2018 on the basis that it violated the Constitution's recognition that all persons are equal before the law. This was very recent. This was in 2018. I believe that was 6 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. So this just goes to show that like it's still happening. Like things are still being, spoken about. Things are still being either brought up or broken down. Reduction from perceivers. Now I feel like a lot of people on the outside, and I put that in quotes because are you really on the outside? No, because you're taking part of it. You're watching us. Nobody is really on the outskirts of anything. You may not identify, that's a good word to use. You may not identify as queer, but it's important to understand like there are people who believe they are an ally and they do take part in this stuff. So reducing LGBTQ stigma among people who do not identify as such is key to ensuring that LGBTQ individuals are not exposed to negative treatment from others. Now, this goes back to a lot in schools, if people view the differences that we have as not differences, and it's just like, hey, they're just queer, they like whoever, then that would be broken down and treatment wouldn't be so separate. So these are just some current events that really stunned me. Like for example, the Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, very recent. The bill banned classroom instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity from kindergarten through third grade. But then on May 18th of 2023, last year, the Florida Board of Education expanded those restrictions to include all grades. Now, in a way, this is trying to separate, people. It's trying to create that classism that, I was talking about earlier, that intersectionality of separate parties. And it's trying to basically, in other words, keep this country apart. And lastly, there have been some drag shows restrictions, specifically in Tennessee. So a lot of activists and allies say this is an attempt at banning queer spaces and culture and a move to push LGBTQ people back into the closet. So the Human Rights Commission has also come out and voiced their opinion. And they say like drag shows is considered a celebration of love and life. And I feel like when you villainize people who say everything is about love and it's about spreading positivity, who's really, trying to limit people? I feel like that's very important that we also come out and say. Also, it's just there's also been a lot of positive things. I can't highlight the negative without the positive. There's been so much positivity. Like very recently in Thailand, for example, they just passed a law that allowed same-sex couples to get married officially, which is a big win, I feel like, for everybody that is queer alike, especially in those countries. So kudos to them for that. Thank you. So what now, Like I brought all of this to the table. I bored you guys with some facts. I brought out some history. So what I want to leave you guys with now is just kind of like a call to action. I feel like right now the state of where the queer community is like they're very much pitting us against each other. They're telling us like keeping us from doing what we have to do, keeping us from allowing us to be who we are. It doesn't take much to be accepting. It doesn't take much to reach out your hand to somebody who really needs that help and kind of just letting them understand that we are here for you, Most people feel like that when you are talking to them about these ideas, you're trying to change the way they were brought up. You're trying to change the way they think. And that's not the case at all when it comes to this. It's more so, wanting to have basic human rights. And I feel like most people don't understand that because they never had their human rights tested before. Like, queer people, Black people, trans people. I feel like they've never had some people have never had those rights kind of tested, Like there's never been a law saying that straight heterosexual couples can't, be together or heterosexual people can't congregate. And I feel like it's very important to highlight that so people can 100% understand like the gravities of these legislations. And it's also very important that we don't just highlight legislations, but we highlight the behavior of people. Because you could put a legislation into effect saying, oh yeah, you are allowed to congregate, you are allowed to get married, but if people don't feel like that is right, there is still going to be stigma surrounding these communities of people who are